This is the greatest discovery in the history of paleontology. We went to Alaska a few months ago with scientists from around the world, scientists from Oxford, and just these were men who were willing to look at the science. So I went to scientist after scientist, ended up talking to about 100 people on the cruise. So I said, I'd like to show you photos from science journals of an animal, and I'd like you to guess, if you could, what animal do you think they're from? And, you know, they couldn't guess that these are from a Tyrannosaurus rex. These are blood vessels and blood cells from a T-Rex in soft, inflexible, transparent tissue. And so I asked, how could it be that there is soft tissue if these bones are supposed to be tens of millions of years old? What I found was interesting.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No.
She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone.
Well, let's say you took a steak and you wrapped it, you hermetically sealed it, you put it in your refrigerator. I mean, try freezing a steak for 10 years. Take it out, you're gonna see it looks haggard. It's had a rough time in that refrigerator.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
Look at that.
Blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1,000,000 years, let alone 68 million.
Now this has major implications for the age of Earth and fossils. If soft tissues in dinosaur bones are the norm, and that is what we are predicting, then these bones cannot be 65 million years old because they're loaded with soft tissues. These break down quickly, and so they can't be old at all.
These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid,
Let's put this under the scope here.
well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel. You see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time.
There is, first of all, just the soft tissue itself that we could look at and with our own eyes say, is this soft, stretchy material, is it 80 million years old? Is it 68 million years old?
This is what we mean by an example of soft tissue which was collected from the Triceratops horn in Montana. I'm going to stretch it. Look at how stretchy this is. And this is full of bone osteocytes, the tiny cells that make this tissue and then impregnate it with bone mineral. And this was found 1 foot from the surface in Montana in the presence of insects, microbes, rodents, plants, and fungal bodies, and we've recovered the DNA of all of those. So this cannot hang around for millions of years in the presence of all those organisms and oxygen and water. And so this is what we're talking about by soft tissue.
Right. Then there is carbon-14, and that is huge.
If the entire Earth were one giant ball of nothing but carbon-14, which deteriorates over time, in 1 million years, the entire ball, the size of the Earth, would be completely gone in 1 million years. Yet they're finding carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. And I'd like to point out, for the record, that a dinosaur bone is a lot smaller than the entire Earth, yet it's still got carbon-14 inside of it. In bottom line layman's terms, though these tests, carbon dating in this case, can spit out dates all over the map in one single chunk of dinosaur bone, what it does prove by sheer virtue of having carbon inside of it is that what you are testing is not very old.
You have dinosaur DNA, and it's been published, although of course these scientists, aware that they're threatened, they're even hated, they're mocked, they say, you know, you have people being fired for the discovery of dinosaur soft tissue for publishing it. What the discovery tells someone with common sense that this dinosaur is not 68 million years old. This dinosaur is more in the range of the age of Egyptian mummies. And so these scientists, first they're in denial, then I get them to Google on their own phone, they go to the journal Nature Science, they see it for themselves, and then they're just bewildered. And they also don't understand why they never heard of it. What should we find if in fact dinosaurs are millions of years old when we look at dinosaur eggshells, and they have, and they've looked at the amino acids? You know what they say? Contamination. Why are there all these left-handed amino acids in these dinosaur eggshells? They shouldn't be there. They should be fully racemized, 50-50. And so you have amino acids, you have DNA half-life, you have carbon-14, then you have just the basic common sense of dinosaur soft tissue where blood vessels are still transparent, flexible, they're stretchy, and when you squeeze them, blood cells come out.
If you are finding carbon-14 in dinosaur bones which contain original biological material from a dinosaur, which you have 11 universities, including Harvard, that have verified that the soft tissue being found inside dinosaur bones is in fact original biological material from a dinosaur. If you've got those two things combined, then it's impossible to argue, it's very difficult to argue, that the carbon inside the dinosaur bones is contamination.
This was presented at a Singapore American Geophysical conference, and it was presented by an international team of scientists who took 10 different dinosaurs from multiple continents, had them carbon-14 data at the world's leading labs, and they showed the results. And after the fact, the American Geophysical Union censored their paper, removed all reference from their paper, and all they said was, we are getting measurable carbon-14 from dinosaur bones all over the world.
The stuff we turned up, the smoking guns that we found that proved them to be liars, in fact, a couple of them perjured themselves to the judge in writing. And so it came down to the judge ruling on a motion that they made before the judge. Judge, just throw this case out. They have no proof of this, no proof of that, and I'll discuss that a little more in detail later. But the judge ruled and said, nope, you're wrong. They produced the facts. And so these are facts. And if you go to trial, and I'm about to force you to go to trial, and not a judge trial, a jury trial. We demanded a jury trial. If you go to trial, the beginning of the trial will be, ladies and gentlemen, here are the undisputable facts in this case. Bing, 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 all against the university. So they knew they couldn't win. And so they came to the mediation table in court. We spent a whole day in the courtroom, and they fought us and fought us and fought us and fought us. We made a demand. They would not meet the demand. And at the end of the day, they were shouting at us across the courtroom with the judge right there. I was mystified. And so we left with no agreement. And we told them, look, we're going to trial, and we're going to bring in this other law firm that already beat you once, high-powered law firm, and our demand is off the table, and sky high is the number. So finally, after a couple of weeks, they caved in and they met our demand. Very few people know about soft tissue in dinosaur bones. And this is why the evolutionists are working so hard to cover this up, to poo-poo it, to demonize those who are in the field. And this field is a career killer, okay? If you want to lose your career in one easy step, go on a dinosaur dig and talk about the soft tissue in it. So it's big, it's huge, it's important. The work is significant. And so Dr. Oppenheimer asked for a paper. I submitted the paper in late December. In fact, people said, you know, Christmas is here. Don't do it now. No, I'm going to do it now. So I did. It was accepted within 30 days. Now that's unheard of. There were not even hardly any revisions that they requested. So I made the revisions, and by January 30th, the paper was accepted for publication, and it was published on February the 12th, either 12th or the 13th. I'm missing that date right now. But it was published online. 2 weeks after my paper was published, I was terminated. Now, in that 2 weeks, some very interesting things happened. My boss, my supervisor, came into my lab, my former supervisor actually, because Dr. Kwok had become my supervisor. My former supervisor came in and he said, "There's a witch hunt going on after you right now. What have you done?" And I said, "Well, I can't think of anything other than the paper. The paper was published online. It was about to come out in the print journal, and I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong." And I said, "Bill, I think it's the paper." Okay, I got to figure this out. So he left, comes back again. "Would you please resign?" And so I thought and prayed. I thought, Lord, should I fight this? This case has never been about Mark Armitage. In fact, this case has never been about dinosaurs. That's just the vehicle that we're riding in to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. If dinosaurs have soft tissue in them, and everywhere we look there's soft tissue, then something is wrong with the belief system that says the world is billions of years old, God doesn't exist, His word is meaningless, Jesus is not coming back. How many people are beaten down by this message every day?
And moreover, we have genetic and fossil evidence going back, and everything.
We have blood vessels.
4.5 billion years old.
We have blood vessels.
4 billion years old. We have many fossils that are almost 1 billion years old, and we have a tremendous amount of evidence of exactly how life evolved on Earth. And why must people reject all the knowledge we have because they insist that they're
because of dinosaur blood vessels.
Why don't you open your mind to the evidence of reality and say, look, if there is a God, the God, as Galileo once said, if there is a God, He gave us a brain. We shouldn't throw the brain out.
I'm talking about nature, science, paleontology.
You know, again, you've got a God of the gaps thing.
No God of the gaps.
We learn our ideas evolve.
Blood vessels, Lawrence, blood vessels don't hang around for 65 million years in sandstone in Montana. Harvard has sequenced proteins.
I've been with Jack Horner in Montana and seen the fossil blood vessels.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's perfectly consistent with things that are 65 million years old.
They say, well, we don't have a problem with, we expect this to happen. We expect these materials to still be here. Based on what? Because the science of tissue decay, the science of protein decay, demonstrates, not just illustrates, I'm talking proves in a lab, a repeatable experimental proof type of background that this stuff should not last even 1 million years.
Oh, yeah, right.
Horner, who was the person who discovered
How about the carbon-14? How about the carbon-14, Lawrence? There's carbon-14 in the mosasaur fossil that has soft tissue. Harvard has sequenced proteins from a hadrosaur. Carbon-14 can't last 1 million years, yet it is everywhere.
Could it be contaminated? I mean, you know, when you talk about anomalies, you know, you're like the people,
Yeah,
you know, who
anomalies.
talk about UFOs, and they say, you know,
Right.
there was a UFO sighting in this.
I agree with you.
You can't tell me it didn't happen. Well, you're absolutely right. There are anomalies.
I agree with you, but these anomalies are everywhere.
Ridiculous anomalies when there's a whole
Lawrence.
basis of knowledge, which tens of thousands of scientists have worked their whole life on. Then people like you come along and say, I want to deny all that knowledge because I've decided in advance of reading anything, based on some book that was written God knows how long ago. That's closed-mindedness.
Lawrence.
That's not open-mindedness.
The anomalies are everywhere worldwide. There's carbon-14, diamonds.
Look, don't talk to me about anomalies. Talk to me about the evidence of
Well,
science.
carbon-14 decays with a half-life of 5,700
That's
years.
right.
This is the greatest discovery in the history of paleontology. I mean, indisputably. Dinosaur soft tissue, dinosaur DNA is the greatest discovery. The science world, the atheistic science world, wants to know nothing about it. They wish it weren't true. They don't want it to be true. When they hear it, they put it out of their minds.
How can anyone in the 21st century think the world is 6,000 years old and still consider themselves not a Neanderthal?
Professor Roberto Fondi is a specialist in paleontology. He teaches at the Department of Earth Sciences in the University of Siena in Italy.
You may be surprised to know that the fundamental assumptions upon which evolutionary thinking is based are not at all confirmed by paleontology. All the biological groups, from bacteria and blue-green algae to man, appear abruptly in the fossil record without any links connecting them with each other.
Why is it then that so many people believe the fossils prove evolution?
Evolution is presented to grown-ups and taught to the very young as a fact that has been verified and demonstrated for so long that it is a waste of time and even ridiculous to question it. So, what is the truth of the matter? Well, there is a history book of the past, and that is the rocks and the fossilized remains in them. So it is up to the paleontologist to read that book and give the answer.
And what do you read in that book, Professor?
The fact is that after nearly 2 centuries of intense research, the paleontological evidence for evolutionary theory is not only rare, but highly questionable. The point is that if evolution had really happened, the evidence would be in great abundance and incontestable. The museums would be overflowing with fossils, clearly documenting the transitions between the various biological groups. Yet there are none. Moreover, there is no indication that the situation will change in the future. Those very few fossils which are claimed to show some kind of evolutionary link, such as the amphibians Ichthyostica and Simoria, the reptile Proplogognathus, the bird Archaeopteryx, and the Australopithecine ape called Homo habilis are very far from conclusive.
I'll tell you. All right.
Every single bit of data. We have evidence.
The Neanderthal
evidence of civilization
Lawrence,
that are older than 10,000 years
Lawrence, the Neanderthal DNA has been sequenced.
Yeah, I know.
It's closer to you than a chimp is to a chimp within the same species of chimps. So the creationists who've been saying for decades that Neanderthals were people have been confirmed. DNA doesn't lie.
What do you mean people?
People. And so we offered Jack Horner, in fact, you could hear it, we offer him thousands of dollars to carbon-14 date their T-Rex. You guys might have other things you'd like to carbon-14 at the same time. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've been able to raise a little more money, so that's up to $10,000 now, that we'd be honored to give you guys if you would consider doing that test.
Well, we can't do that test. Because carbon-14 doesn't work on something like this.
Right.
Your results that you get could be all over the place.
Well, they should be infinity. It should be not datable. In other words, it shouldn't come back saying it's 25,000 years old.
Right.
It should be infinity. And he turns it down. And I say, Jack, is it not enough money? And I keep First 5,000, 10,000, 20. We go up to, it costs 3,000 to run the test on 5 different specimens.
And they thought, well, it'd be logical to do this, to just go ahead and do it, even though nobody would be inclined to do it, just like nobody would be inclined to look for soft tissue inside of a T-Rex.
Well, yeah, and, we're still trying to figure out what it is, what it's actually made of.
Right, exactly, whether it's hemoglobin or whatever.
Well,
Jack, is the amount too small that it's just not worth the consideration?
No, that's not it.
Okay. What if I were able to raise more money?
No, the amount of money has nothing to do with it.
So we say we'll pay the $3,000 for the test, and we'll give you a $20,000 grant. We will, just for you to run the scientific test. And he's hemming and hawing, and he's saying,
"Not going to help us."
Yeah. So even though it's just a scientific test, they're not asking for voodoo.
It's not actually a scientific test. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Carbon-14 dating something with soft tissue in it.
He said, "I don't want to run that." Then he's finally, I'm almost pleading with him. And we aired this on the radio. We sent him a written grant offer, finally $23,000. And he said, "I'll talk to Mary Schweitzer and we'll let you know." Well, they decided not to run the test.
But contamination is a big critique. Now let's understand this. The cells that we're looking at are bone cells. They are inside the bone. They're what make the bone, dissolve the bone, and refashion the bone. In fact, this is going on constantly. Your bones are under constant refashioning. Someone has said that your entire skeleton is replaced every 12 years. Completely replaced. What does that? It's these bone cells. Fabulous little cells that not only do this bone reshaping and repairing, they'll repair your bones. You get a fracture, the doctor approximates your 2 bones together and puts a cast on you, and what happens? The bone cells get in there and they repair it. They're amazing. Now, if I'm looking at bone cells and their contamination, I contend that these are dinosaur bone cells. People say, no, it's contamination. Now think through this with me, okay? You have a dinosaur bone, maybe on the surface of the Badlands in Montana, maybe a little bit below the surface. But you're not looking at bone cells from the dinosaur, you're looking at bone cells from some other living creature that has bones, right? So what could it be? Maybe a bird, a hawk, was going after a mouse or a rabbit in the Montana sky, and so he misjudged and he smashed into the ground, killed himself, broke a wing in the process. So now the bone cells crawled out of the bird wing, found their way through the soil, found the bone, crawled into the bone, and lined up in just the perfect way that we always find bone cells. Not only are they lined up, they're interconnected. They have these little thread feet that come out and touch each other. Why? Because they're all interconnected. All of these bone cells are talking to each other. And they do that through these nano-sized, amazing little Philippodia, thread feet. And so it's preposterous. It's preposterous for the contamination charge to even be considered. Now, another charge that was leveled was the biofilm contamination charge. You're not looking at bone cells, you're looking at basically bacteria poop that formed itself to look exactly like bone cells. Come on. Okay, do bacteria make poop? Yes. Okay, it's called biofilm. They live in it. It's kind of a gross thought. But it's kind of a sugary, sort of slimy coating that coats once living material because they're consuming it. And as they're consuming it, they're producing waste, and the waste makes this nice little home that they live in. But somehow, some way, the bacteria figured out, and this would be a Nobel Prize, folks. This would be a Nobel Prize. The bacteria figured out how to turn their poop into exactly what they're eating. Okay, that would be a Nobel Prize. So that's preposterous on its face. But secondly, Mary Schweitzer proved beyond a doubt that the proteins she was finding were not bacterial proteins. They were mammalian proteins, reptilian proteins, I should say. Reptilian-like, because dinosaurs, they're not reptiles. They are in a sense, but just a little bit different.
When we come to the scientific evidence, which we're going to examine now in some detail, we actually find that most methods that have been used by scientists to date the world give a young age. It's been estimated about 90% of them give a young age. So guess which ones they focus on the most? The 10%. Why? Well, it's obviously they require the millions of years for their evolutionary story, their evolutionary creation myth, because that's what it is. Without the millions of years, there's no time for evolution. It wouldn't even get out of the starting blocks. By the way, even with billions of years, it can't get out of the starting blocks.
You see, evolution is a structure supported by basically two pillars. One is chance and one is time. Chance is required because we obviously cannot say that a thinking entity, a living God, whatever you want to call him, a thinking force, created life on Earth. That's anathema to those who are called materialists, who say only the stochastic random chance of materialism, matter acting on matter, erosion, wind action, those kind of things produced life. If you kick out one of those two pillars, the whole structure of evolution collapses. If you kick out the pillar of chance by showing incredible design, then the structure of evolution starts to totter and it may crash and fall, because you cannot have design in a world that is not supposed to have a designer. The other pillar is time, deep time, deep time. You cannot get a man from a frog in a short period of time, unless the princess kisses the frog, and we call that a fairy tale. And so that's not science. But in science, you have to have deep time to get evolution. In fact, the more you look at the design in living systems, the more time you need. And so you may have noticed that in 1950, the age of the Earth was 1 billion years, maybe. If you look at the geology textbooks from the 1950s, the age of the Earth is 1 billion years. Well, what's the age of the Earth today? Well, 4.6 billion years. So the Earth has had huge birthdays in the last, 50, 150 years. Why? Because they need deep time. They are committed to deep time. So I thought, I'm going to point my microscope at phenomena that reflect on deep time. And I've been very successful at it. I've done work on radio halos. I've done work on diamonds and radio halos in diamonds. Now, I know I'm saying some things to your viewers that they might not understand. But what I want to impress them with is that the evolutionists understand what I'm talking about, and they've come after me. So I've done published work in these areas. Helium in rocks. We did a whole series of studies on helium that should have escaped the rocks. Radioactivity causes helium. Radioactivity produces helium. I could go into a long discussion about it, but I'd bore everybody to death. But the bottom line is radioactive minerals in the earth produce helium. Now, helium is a gas. In fact, it's a very interesting gas. It doesn't make compounds with other atoms. It's called a noble gas because it's noble and it doesn't associate with other gases. It's very funny when you think about it. But you can put it in a balloon or you can put it in a dirigible and float that thing. Now, we've all received a birthday balloon, a helium balloon, right? And somebody gives you that balloon and you're all excited and you tie it to your bedpost and you're looking at it as you go to sleep, and when you wake up in the morning, where's the balloon? Well, it's on the floor. Well, why is my helium balloon on the floor? Oh, because it lost strength overnight and it just got tired of holding up the balloon. No, it escaped the balloon. That's what helium does. It's a slippery gas. And so in order to keep it in a container, you got to really tighten that container. Back to the rocks and the helium in the rocks. Why is that significant? Well, because if the Earth is billions and billions of years old, all the radioactivity that took place over that billions of years produced helium, and all that helium shouldn't be in the rocks. But we found up to 60% of the helium produced still in the rocks. What does that mean? It means the Earth has to be young. Can't be old and still retain all that helium. It's a slippery gas. So I pointed my microscope at that. But you know, these explanations on things about deep time are hard for people. I get it. I start talking about radioactivity and people start yawning and looking out the window. I get that. And so years ago, I started thinking, well, what can I find that goes after deep time, but that everybody can understand? And then I started reading the work of Mary Schweitzer. And I saw that not only Mary Schweitzer, but others before her had been exposing to the scientific community there is soft tissue in dinosaur bones. In fact, Roman Pawlicki from a university in Poland has been publishing about soft tissue in dinosaur bones since the 60s. Most people are shocked to hear that. Why? Because it's not in the literature. Nobody talks about it. Why? People don't want to talk about it. Why? Because it destroys deep time. Soft tissue in dinosaur bones destroys deep time. Dinosaur bones cannot be old if they're full of soft tissue. And I made a prediction back in 2012 or 2011 that soft tissue in the dinosaur record, in the fossil record, is going to be the rule rather than the exception. And it's coming true every day. New discussions, new discoveries of soft tissue are coming about. And so I went after that pillar of time because I think that that is the linchpin. It's the Achilles heel of evolution. If you don't have deep time, you don't have evolution. The whole discussion of evolution ends if you show that the Earth is young. Evolution you can erase it off the whiteboard because things like soft tissue and dinosaur bone, and we're not talking just goopy stuff. I've had these professors critique me and say, well, he found some goopy stuff. No. Look at the cells that I've been finding, the actual bone cells, and things that other people have been finding that show that no decay happened. Well, how is that possible? Even, I'm mystified because I don't even understand how these bones could be 4,000 or 4,500 years old or 5,000. We don't, when did the flood occur? I don't know. We have some guesstimates, but we don't know for sure. But even if the flood happened 1,000 years ago, why am I finding these kind of cells? This compact bone, massive bone mineral, and never comes in contact with blood. Ask any orthopedist, any orthopedic surgeon, and he will tell you that none of these bone tissues, like the soft stretchy tissue, ever come in contact with blood. So the iron from the blood could have never preserved this soft, stretchy tissue and all of the bone osteocytes that we have discovered and shown you. And so this is akin to a 10th grade science experiment, and it's not reality. I mean, iron oxides are so reactive. In fact, just go to the Rust Belt during the winter and look at all the rusted out cars, and you'll see the effect of iron oxides on metals, let alone tissues. And so these iron chelation that they talk about in this video, this is used to remove heavy metals from the body. it is in no way a standardized protocol for the preservation of tissues. If it is, it would be in my electron microscope manuals on methods to preserve tissue for long periods of time. In addition, if this was a standard protocol for the wonderful preservation of tissues for long periods of time, don't you think all these very wealthy people who are freezing their bodies in hopes of being revived some thousands of years in the future when medical cures are available to help them with their current woes, don't you think they would be using iron chelation as a protocol to save themselves, to preserve themselves? This is hogwash, folks, and it's a lie. It's a method that the evolutionists are using to prove that soft tissue now has an explanation. It has no explanation. We don't know why these soft tissues are preserved. There's no method, there's no protocol, there's no methodology that we know of that can preserve these tissues for long periods of time. So, you know, the evolutionists are still up the creek without a paddle. They cannot explain how these tissues have been preserved for a long time, and the conclusion is obvious. These bones, which are not fossils, they're bones that can be dissolved in acids, are young. They have to be young. If the bones are young, then the deposits are young. If the deposits are young, then the earth is young. If the earth is young, then Genesis suddenly becomes believable. There is a creator who made our grandparents, Adam and Eve, put them in a perfect garden, but sin entered the world, changed everything, and now we need Jesus Christ as our mediator, as our helper, as our forgiver to get us back to God.
The first misimpression that I have to clear up here, because people think, well, haven't rocks been radiometrically proven to be billions of years old, right? And people have misconceptions about that. They just think it's almost like magic. You know, you take up your rock, you hold your tricorder out, you scan it, and there it is, millions of years old, right? Well, really, it's more complicated than that. I'm going to kind of sum it up here for you briefly. It's again more complicated than this, but basically there are certain kinds of atoms in nature that are unstable. We call them, they're said to be radioactive. And what that means is they will spontaneously change into another type of atom. You don't have to, there's no external force necessary. Uranium-238, for example, will spontaneously change into the next atom, which changes into the next one, and so on, all the way down to lead-206. Lead-206 is not radioactive, it's stable, and so once you're lead-206 forever, you are lead-206, unless there's some kind of outside force. But fortunately, only a small fraction of atoms are of the radioactive variety, so you don't have to worry about changing into something else within the next 24 hours anyway. Now, the idea is this process, at least for some atoms like uranium, is very, very slow. You know, atom by atom, one popping into the next, and so on. And so the idea is if you had a chunk of solid uranium and you waited long enough, it would be part uranium and part lead with some of the intermediate elements as well. And eventually it would be all lead. That's the idea. And so you can use that like a clock because the rate is known. And it's thought not to be affected by temperature, at least not very much, or by chemistry and so on. And so it seems like it's a really good clock. And so if you pick up a rock on Earth and it's got some uranium and some lead in it, you could extrapolate backwards and figure out when the rock was all uranium. But how do you know it was all uranium to begin with? Maybe the rock had some lead in it to begin with when it was first created, right? So you'd have to know what it started with, right? Well, how do I know what it started with? Well, you tell me how old you want the rock to be and I'll tell you what it started with, you see? And by the way, evolutionists do not assume that it started with all uranium. They assume that it had some lead in it to begin with. In a way, it's the same way that you can keep time with an hourglass. Now, I think you can keep time with an hourglass if certain assumptions are met. I mean, if you came in here and I had an hourglass, starting when you first came in here and it looked like that, it looked like it does on the screen with about halfway through, and I say, how long ago did I turn that over? That's easy. It's an hourglass, halfway done, half an hour, right? I say, oh, I got you, because in fact it was sideways when I first came in. Already a lot of the sand was in the bottom chamber. You see, you assumed that all the sand started in the top chamber, which would be like assuming the rock was all uranium to begin with, and that wasn't the case. Or how do you know that somebody didn't come and add sand to the hourglass when you weren't looking, right? That would affect your age estimate. And in fact, in rocks, certain chemicals like uranium are leachable in salt water. They can actually move in and out of the rock. It's possible for that to happen. Or how do you know the throat of the bottle has always been the same size? Even if the throat was wide, it's probably realistic for an hourglass, but we think that the rate at which radioactivity occurs can change. We know it can change under certain circumstances because we can do it. Certain kinds of radioactivity have been accelerated by a factor of 1 billion in laboratories. And so if it can happen in laboratories, it can probably happen outside of laboratories too. So basically, these are some of the assumptions involved in radiometric dating. That the initial conditions are known, that the decay rate is constant. We have very good evidence that number 2 is wrong. And for that reason, the estimated ages of these rocks are going to be very much inflated because they assume that the decay rate's been constant when in fact it hasn't. But regardless of these details, I want you to take home this bottom line. Here's the bottom line. We've tested rocks of known age, and they fail in terms of getting the right radiometric age estimate. Mount St. Helens, for example, when it erupted in 1980 and there were some subsequent eruptions, we took some brand new rocks that had formed from the magma, and that's supposed to set the 0 point for the radiometric clocks. And we sent them in and had them radiometrically dated, which you normally wouldn't do because it's expensive. Why would you test it on a rock of known age, right? Well, because we wanted to check the method. We wanted to see if the method works. And these brand new rocks came back with estimated ages of hundreds of thousands to millions of years on brand new rocks. And you say, well, that's an isolated incident. It's not. If you go to Hawaii and you take a rock from Hawaii and have it radiometrically dated, a brand new rock, you saw it come out of the volcano, you could stick your pike in it and let it cool right there and send it in, you will get millions of years, pretty consistently. So the bottom line is radiometric dating has been shown to not work on rocks of known age, and yet evolutionists assume it works on rocks of unknown age. Now, to me, that's a lot of blind faith right there. That's not a reasonable faith. We all have faith. That's not a reasonable faith. Those layers did not exist before 1980. Those were all produced in the Mount St. Helens eruptions. Isn't that interesting? And they're solid rock now. They were formed by a pyroclastic flow that came out of that volcano. And Mount St. Helens was a small volcano by volcano standards, really. The Bible says that during the Great Flood, all the fountains of the Great Deep burst forth. That might indicate all the volcanoes on Earth going off, something like that. So, and it carved out again, the Mount St. Helens eruption carved out a canyon, 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon. It did this in days. It doesn't take millions of years for these things to happen. It happens quickly under the right circumstances. So you see, when we take a look at geology and we see how these rock layers form today, and we see how they can form under catastrophic conditions, we find that it's really very consistent with what we'd expect from Genesis.
Why should you believe in creation and not evolution? I mean, scientifically speaking. Haven't we proven that evolution is a fact? Did you know that for every generation that passes, more and more mistakes are piling up in the human genome? This means that your DNA has more mistakes than your parents' DNA, which has more mistakes than their parents' DNA, which has more mistakes than their parents, which has, well, you get the point. These mistakes are caused by mutations, which are basically copying errors when DNA is replicated. Now, thankfully for us, most of these mutations have no noticeable effect. But even if we don't notice them, they're still there, corrupting our DNA. A conservative estimate says that 100 to 300 new mutations occur in human reproductive cells per individual per generation. Now, some numbers are as high as 1,000 new mutations per individual per generation. That's a lot of mistakes. Now, most people think that natural selection will get rid of these mutations. After all, isn't that its job? Well, it's not quite that easy. You see, natural selection can only select against mutations that have a noticeable and significant effect in the moment. If the mutation is neutral, or even if it's harmful but hasn't caused death or serious harm, natural selection won't get rid of it because it can't see it. This leads to what's known as genetic entropy. This means that each generation carries all the mutations of previous generations, plus its own new mutations. And with a high mutation rate, genetic entropy is increasing quickly. Actually, it's increasing so fast, there is no way humans have been on the planet for millions of years like evolution suggests. Our genetic code would be so burdened with mutations, we'd be such a mess that we'd be extinct. Our genetic code doesn't look like it's been mutating for even tens of thousands of years. Instead, it looks like it was incredibly well designed and has only been subject to the degrading influence of mutations for a short time. Now, what does this imply? It certainly fits with the biblical historical accounts that God created mankind about 6,000 years ago with a perfect genome. It wasn't until after sin entered the world that mutations began to corrupt our DNA, and there hasn't been enough time since to completely destroy our genome. Just one more scientific reason that you shouldn't believe in human evolution.
So this guy's got a PhD, Nathaniel Jensen, I think from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty sure it's from Harvard. And he's now a creationist. He's got a really interesting study here. So he looked at the mitochondrial rates between, all humans. And if you look at the top chart up here, if evolution is true, this should be how many differences you'd expect in the mitochondrial DNA, given about he's estimating over about 180,000 years. If in just a 10,000 year time frame, we'd expect a range between 7 and 16 DNA differences, and this is what we get. So which one matched the prediction? Which one fits which worldview? Same thing here with the fruit flies. This was what, if evolution is true, you'd expect that. If creation is true, you'd expect that. This is what the data says. Same thing with roundworms. If evolution is true, if creation is true, and here's the results. It's a pretty neat study. We covered that on a radio show not too long ago.
Evolutionists treasure their assumptions and presumptions. They value them very highly, and they disregard scientific knowledge. They do this continuously. The reason they do it is because they have to in order to continue to believe in evolution. Because the scientific evidence discredits what they presume to be true. And so, in order to cling to their precious evolution theory, because they deny their creator, they value what they assume to be true and will disregard any and all scientific knowledge that refutes what they say they believe. I'm going to give you one evidence in this video that man cannot be a product of evolution, neither can chimpanzees. And in fact, the entirety of the evolution theory is false. Chimpanzee genome is 10% larger than that of humans. That means they have 10% more base pairs, typically, than a human being. That is a tremendous difference in our genomes. In other words, their genome, their DNA molecule, is 10% longer than that of human beings. The problem is this. For this to have been true by evolution theory, during the period of time that has lapsed since humans and chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor, random mutations, copy, duplication, paste errors in the genome would have had to have resulted in this tremendous difference by building 10% more DNA in a chimpanzee than in a human being. Depending on which evolutionist you speak to, this period of time is anywhere from 250,000 to 2 million years. So giving them the benefit of the doubt, in 2 million years, random mutation has built in the chimpanzee 10% more DNA molecule than in human beings. But here's why this cannot be the truth. Because random mutation, building that much more DNA in any organism, would constitute a mutation load too great for the organism, and it would have gone extinct. Because of what we observe are the effects of random mutation upon organisms, there is no way, it is completely impossible, that random mutation has built 10% more DNA in a chimpanzee than a human being and produced viable chimpanzees which are healthy and can survive. Chimpanzees would have gone extinct if this kind of mutation load had been experienced long before they could have diverged into chimpanzees from a common ancestor with man. It is not possible. So from this alone, we know evolution theory is false. And here are two of many scientific research papers that explain why this is so. The first is a white paper. The second is a book on genetics by Jonathan Sanford, Cornell University geneticist. The first states, contamination of the genome by very slightly deleterious mutations. Why have we not died 100 times over? This scientist asks the question, if mutation has built the genomes of human beings, how is it possible, knowing the effects of random mutation, that human beings during their evolution have not become extinct 100 times over? And Jonathan Sanford expresses the same knowledge. These are just two of many scientific research projects or books or white papers that demonstrate that what we have discovered is this. The mutation load in living things is far too high for evolution to be true. It is impossible for evolution to be true.
You decide. Random, traumatically mutated, non-purposed, accidental evolution, or intelligent design? Any truly intelligent person knows the intelligent answer to that question.